So I finished cutting everything out and I've ironed everything for preparation for sewing. So the pieces I have are the fabric for the bag, the main body of the bag, which I've ironed in half already along the bottom. So you fold it in half. And ironing this stuff beforehand just makes it a little bit easier when you have to fold stuff. And then you have your straps. So I cut two and I've already finished one just for the sake of time so you can see what the strap looks like when it's done. But this is one. And again, it's folded in half and then I ironed it in half. And then I also ironed it at the top and the bottom just by folding it down so that when you fold it and sew it, it has like a nice clean edge like this one. And I will show you how I did that. Okay, so the first step we're going to do is sewing the bags together. So after you trace it, the easiest thing you can do is just sew along these lines that you already traced on the fabric. I'm not going to show you how I threaded this machine necessarily because your machine might be different from mine, but all home machines basically work the same. They have a handy numbered guide on the top. Here you can see there's numbers and you just follow step 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way down to the needle. And then when you get to the needle, it's important that you thread the thread going front to back, so going this way. And then when you put in your bobbin, you want to go counterclockwise. You want to make sure it's facing counterclockwise. So the important things about the machine that you're going to need to know, which you probably already know if you use sewing machines, is the pedal obviously controls the speed. There's the knob that controls the stitch style, so you want a straight stitch. Here's the reverse thing. So whenever you start and end a stitch, you want to go backwards a tiny bit so that it basically locks the stitch in place and it doesn't unravel. And then there's the knob on the other side right here that you can turn to move the needle, and you always want to turn that knob towards yourself, not away from yourself, so always towards you. Because it like sort of messes up the timing of the machine if you turn it away, and it could skip stitches and things like that. So I'm doing this at a stitch length of 3. That's kind of like an average stitch. And then the tension is about a 3.5. That tension knob is usually at the top of a machine, and that just controls like how tight and how wide the stitch is. You can play around with that depending on what kind of fabric you use. It might need a different stitch tension and stitch length. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sew the body of the bag together. So what you're going to do is fold it in half long ways. So like I said, you won't have a seam at the bottom because you just folded it in half, and we're just going to sew up the sides and leave the top open. So just like with the strap, I ironed the top already because we're going to fold it down to make a clean finished edge, and I will show you that when we get to that point. But for right now, you don't need to fold the top down, just keep it straight like that, and we're going to sew. So you can, the easiest thing you can do is just trace along this line, or sew along this line, and that's the seam allowance that we were talking about, this extra 1/2 inch, because you want your bag to be the size of this line. And so you add this extra so you can actually like sew inside this space. Okay. So you want to line this up with the needle and put the foot down. Here's the lever right here that puts this foot, this guy, up and down. So you don't want to sew with that up. You always want to put it down like that. And then use the knob over here to move. It moves the needle up and down, so you want to put the needle down into the fabric before you start sewing. That's really important. It just helps with the timing of the machine if you do those things. It doesn't make a huge difference, but there could be one bad time that you don't do that, and then your needle breaks and flies into somebody's face. I've seen it happen. Okay, so you're just going to go forward a few stitches. You can do this by hand first. So like when you first start, you just go forward like 3 or 4 stitches, And then you're going to use the reverse and go backwards along those same stitches, and that locks it in place. And now once you've done, that's called doing a back stitch. So once you've done a back stitch, you can go forward until the end, and you're going to do a back stitch again at the end. So I'm just going to sew along this line that I traced. Okay, and now that I'm at the end, I'm going to stop, and before I take my fabric off, I'm just going to back stitch. Okay, and you don't have to back stitch very far, just a little bit, just to make sure it locks. Okay, and so then to take it off, you want to make sure your needle is all the way up, and the way that you can tell, so you turn your knob until it's all the way up, and the way that you can tell is there's this little silver hook, and when it pops out, that's how you know. So you want it to be all the way up, and it'll be easy to just like pull this off. So then you lift your foot up and pull this off and just like cut the thread off. And so then you're just going to do the same thing on the other side too. Back stitching at the beginning and at the end. So again, you just line up with that line that you traced already, go forward a few stitches, hit the reverse, go backwards, and then go forward again until you get to the end. You get to the end and you back stitch again. Turn this so the needle is all the way up with the little hook all the way up. Lift your foot up, pull it off, and cut. So this is the body of the bag. So now you just turn it right side out so that the seams are on the inside. So you're just going to turn it and just like push the corners out with your fingers like that. Basically any sewing that you do, oh my god, this dog. Any sewing that you do is inside out, and then you flip it back. So then the last thing I'm going to do with the bag is, you see where I already ironed it at the top? I'm just going to flip this. One second, I'm going to let him outside. Oh, he went outside himself. So you just flip the top down where I already ironed it, like this, so that you have a clean edge. And then you're just going to sew that down on the machine. So you can just like kind of hold it and put it down in there. And you can stitch this along the edge, but I'm going to stitch kind of in the middle of this. And when you're doing this, you don't really need to back stitch because you're going in a circle, and you'll go back over the same spot again, so you'll see. So you just and you're just like rotating it. And also something I should mention, each machine you'll see on this part right here has like these little lines, and you can use those lines on that metal plate to line up your fabric and make sure you're sewing straight. Those are also measurements too. So if you didn't have like that tracing line to stitch on top of, then you can line up with these lines on the plate, and there will be like a 1/2 inch line that you can just line up the edge of the fabric to, and then you know you're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance that way. Okay, so then when I get back to where I started, you just go over where you already sewed, and that does the same thing as a back stitch. But you can back stitch anyway, just for extra security. But this part of the bag isn't securing anything, so it doesn't necessarily need to like be locked in place because it's not going to be holding any of the weight. This is just so it has a clean edge and looks pretty. Then you just snip off all your threads. And there you go. Now you can see I have like a finished edge on this bag. And the next thing you want to do is the strap. So you're pretty much doing the same exact thing with the strap, but you are going to close the top and the bottom of it. So here's one that I haven't done yet, and I already did one, and I'll show you. So again, you're going to fold it in half and just stitch up the side all the way. And like with the bag, I already ironed the top so that I can fold it to have a clean edge once this is closed. So just going to make sure that, you know, it's straight. Each edge of the fabric is straight with each other. You can pin it if that makes it easier for you. You can like safety pin it in place, or if you have sewing pins, you can use those as well. Just be careful not to sew over the pins. Like take the pins out before they go under the needle, because they could hit the needle and break, and that's actually really dangerous. So again, you're just going to sew a few stitches and then go back and back stitch, and then go all the way to the end and back stitch again. Okay, so I'm at the end, and I'm going to back stitch again, just like before. Turn the needle, lift the foot, and pull this off. So then you have to turn this inside out. What I usually do to turn this inside out to make this easier is you can use a safety pin and just hook this on to your fabric and use that to kind of like guide it through. So you push it down and just kind of push it in. Kind of like if you're turning a sock inside out or something. And you just use that to help like push this along. And then when you're able to, you can just grab the safety pin and pull the rest of your fabric through. Yeah, just like that. So then you take your edge up here and you flip it inside, just like with the top of your bag, like that. And then with this edge, you're just going to sew it closed so that you have a closed thing. And you just do that at the top and the bottom. There, so it's just sewn closed. And here I have one that's already finished, so I can show you how you actually attach the straps, and that's the last step. So yeah, I sewed it closed at the top and the bottom because nothing needs to go inside the strap, obviously. And then I ironed it flat just because it looks nice when you iron things. It's okay if you don't, but it helps. Okay, so next, I'm just going to move this to the side so you can see what I'm doing. Is you want to place your straps where you want them to be. So if you did like one strap, you could just place it like this, but since I'm doing two, it's going to place it there. So that's where I want my straps to be. And you can pin this in place also if that helps. I'm just going to hold it where it needs to go. So you have your strap where it needs to go, and now we're going to do something called pivoting. on the sewing machine. It's very easy, don't worry, it's not an intimidating thing. It's just like sewing a square, basically. So you have your strap where you want it to go, and you put the strap and the bag under the needle. And put your foot down, put your needle down into both the strap and the bag together. You do your first few stitches before you do the back stitch. So do a few, do a back stitch, and then go to right before the edge of the strap. So then you want to make sure to do this pivot, you need to have your needle down into the fabric. So if it's not, you can just turn the wheel to put the needle down in, and then you're gonna lift up the foot while the needle is still in there. So this lets you turn it without anything coming off because the needle's holding it in place, and you can just like turn this. So what you're gonna do is turn and like straighten everything out and do like a right angle. Then you go along the edge of the strap to the bottom of the strap, right towards the end. Do the same thing again where you leave the needle down and turn it. Then you put the foot back down, sew the bottom of the strap. Put the needle down. If you go too far, then you can just back stitch back to the strap. Sometimes I accidentally go a little bit too far. It can be a little hard to control the machine sometimes. So then you do the same thing again, needle down, foot up, turn, foot down, and then sew. And then once you've sewn a complete square, you do another back stitch. Then you can lift this up and take it off. And cut your threads. And there, see? It's a square, and now this strap is attached to the bag. You could also then like do an X. You might see that sometimes on bags. There's like an X inside the square too. That just adds a little bit of extra strength, but this is usually fine. So you can see like I went across, and then when I get to the edge, you leave the needle down and you turn it and then go around, and then leave the needle down, turn it, and go around. So I'm just going to finish this up, and then I'll show you what the finished product looks like. Okay, so I finished attaching the straps, the bag, so here you go. There's a tote bag with 2 straps. Make sure to be careful not to sew it closed when you're putting the straps on. That's an easy mistake to make. Here you can see where I sewed the squares, where I did the pivot. Here at the top, where I finished the edge just by folding it down a little bit and sewing it down so you have a clean edge. You can see on the inside, here is the seam allowance. Like I said, now this is the exact size that I wanted because I add this extra and stitched on that edge. Here, let me grab that book that I traced so I can show you. So now this bag is the exact same size as this book. And if I hadn't added that extra 1/2 inch, then the bag would be 1/2 inch smaller than this book when I actually sewed it together. So yeah, there you go. Now you know how to make a tote bag.